And Don seemed to sort of be falling asleep. He was very tired. And then the other person was more alert. They both, Lance, the other guy, he was sort of new. I don't think he was brand new, but somewhat new to taking reports. And he was the one who was asking most of the questions, and then the other guy sat there and just sort of supervised. It is how I felt it ran. There were a couple times where he nodded or looked over at the other guy if he thought there was a point to be made and make sure to note it or write it down. But the person mainly asking questions was this other person. And right now as I'm talking, I'm definitely being tortured to this ear. They're targeting my ear now. And that is also why I've been using a lot of ums and uhs, and it's not going as smoothly as it did just a little while ago. Because I've got I have the United States interfering with what I'm doing. So as I was saying, after the one person, they started asking me about the events and what happened, and I told them exactly what I've already said. And I said I wasn't totally sure if possibly there was someone, if Robin Bechtold was involved in some way or knew either one of them. And I didn't know, probably should have brought up Jonathan Gold, whatever, but I didn't. And then I said I had met someone named Mike Tanzer before I met them, but I didn't know that they were connected at all. And that's all I said about that. And then they asked me, I told them what had happened, and then at one point Lance, or the Mormon guy, asked me if I had ever felt, he said, so you've never felt sexually harassed, is that correct? And I said, well, what does sexual harassment mean? And then they both looked at each other and looked at me, and I said, I don't know if I've been sexually harassed if I don't know what the definition is of sexual harassment. So, I mean, I said I don't know. And that's, I told them, I gave them the information about how they had touched me and how they had gone into my apartment illegally. But I gave them the exact same story that I've shared with anyone else. However, then when I got the report, the small amount that I did receive from the FBI 7 years later, it has, it basically, I can see why people treated me badly. And I don't know who wrote this report up. I don't know if Don was the person who decided to put it together, or if Lance was, or if they possibly gave it to an attorney and the attorney crafted it with them, because it's basically like Amy Rowe drafted it herself. Amy Rowe, the reporter for Willamette Week. It is very similar in style to Dick Whittemore's and John Camp's motions and how they try to reconstruct things and conceal things. Basically, it reads like the work of an attorney. So as to who actually wrote the final report that was submitted to the FBI, I have no idea. But they did definitely harm me by making me sound like I was just complaining about something that I had nothing really to complain about. Or that, it was possibly professional misconduct, but they left all of the more important elements out of it. So I do have that with me. And And I am going to probably address it tomorrow, because I'd like to include it with what I'm talking about on this topic. However, right now, I think that I will just keep moving. And so, after they were there for maybe an hour and a half or so, then they left, and they said, if you have any questions, give us a call. Gave me their phone number and everything. And then after that, I was commuting again. I went back to Washington State, got some things, and then I was going back to Portland to work on college and on my lawsuits. And at that time, with my lawsuits, with the Mount Angel Abbey lawsuit that I had filed, it got sent into the Archdiocese of Portland of Oregon bankruptcy lawsuit, because the Archdiocese of Portland, Oregon decided to try their novel idea of filing for bankruptcy, which was the first time the church had ever, or any church had tried to do that. And that meant that any lawsuit in the state of Oregon that had the Archdiocese name attached, that was of the same nature, was then sent and redirected over to the bankruptcy court, the federal bankruptcy court. So that's how I ended up involved in the Archdiocese bankruptcy matter, which mainly had a lot of people that had been sexually abused by clergy involved, and I was not sexually abused by them. I had more of a Section 1983 claim and improper use of police by them, and intentional emotional distress, infliction of emotional distress. So I was trying to put some documents into the file that I knew were beneficial to all clients, not just me. And it had to do with the Abbey and Archdiocese corporate structure and governance, and that was a very key issue because it determined what assets and what monies and properties could be used to meet the demands of the plaintiffs for compensation and damages. And so it was extremely important to discover and find out how the corporate organization was, because it determined whether you could include a parish that was in the same area, whether you were including a school, a monastery, land lots, bank accounts. They had a bunch of different kinds of bank accounts for all these different various organizations, and showing how they were connected or not connected and were independent of each other mattered in the scheme of how large of a sum of money you were dealing with that could be used to compensate these victims of really horrific crimes. And what happened to those victims were crimes. I mean, they were taking these things to civil court because they had no other alternative. Their statutes had expired for reporting crimes and felonies. But we're dealing with crimes, so in hindsight I look at it, and basically when you start throwing in the fact that it's a church and it's an organized business, or nonprofit, you're then looking at organized crime in a sense. You're looking at an aspect of organized crime, which is why I believe that the FBI was involved in it, and I didn't know it at the time. But I do believe they were involved and had an interest in those cases, and I also think that because it could have gone one way or the other depending on who you involved in the FBI, I think that people were picking and choosing who was overseeing that lawsuit. So I had done a lot of research, and I had some information that was contrary to what was being used and brought up in the public record and in court.